Video is going to be a how to fight Mesmer as Thief. And the most important thing to take out of this video is not how to deal with the current iteration of meta Mesmer. It's how to deal with any kind of build that ever will become meta in the future. And how you do that is you learn that build. So here I am looking at the current iteration of the Chronomancer power with Paladin's Amulet, and immediately I can see it has a lot of boons. There's a lot of protection uptime, and it's going to be difficult for me to keep their protection off of them because they're going to get it back so easily. Let's see how much Condi Cleanse they have. So they have Condi Cleanse here. It's 1 Condi Cleanse every time you use a healing skill, and every time you use a shatter. Yeah, every time you use a shatter, and every time you summon a phantasm. Now that's a lot of Condi Cleanse, but if you think about it, it's actually quite spaced out. It's very gradual Condi Cleanse, and especially since this requires you to summon a phantasm to clear Condis. Say for example, if I were playing Condi Sword Dagger Thief, I could use my Sword 2 return to get out of range of them so that they couldn't summon any phantasms after I do my Condi burst, and they're sitting there with their Condis and they can't remove it unless they're, there's another target there. But that's an idea of how you understand how a build works. You look at the traits, you see exactly where they're getting their Condi Cleanse. You don't just say, hey, this build has a lot of Condi Cleanse. No, you say, well, how do I get around that? And one of the most important things about the Thief versus Mesmer matchup is Consume Plasma, which is the stolen ability if you're a core Thief or Daredevil. And you can see it gives you every boon in the game. Quickness for 2.5 seconds, Alacrity for 3 seconds, Protection for 10, that's really strong. So it's really important that you get the plasma. So if you missteal, you do not get the plasma. So it's really important that you know the animations of Mesmer so that you do not missteal, and you know when to steal, and you know kind of how to count dodges. Blurred Frenzy is the Sword 2 attack, which is a 2.5 second evade, which also does decent damage. It's on a 12-second cooldown, so it can be used very often and gives Mesmers a really high evade uptime, and it can even be used more often if you're playing versus a Chronomancer who has Alacrity. And what you want to do is, because it roots them in place, you want to walk away instead of dodge, because they can't keep moving towards you since they're rooted in place. And it can also have higher evade uptime than the listed amount if they stand still. So you want to watch out for that. You don't want to always cast Steal or something right into the aftercast of Blurred Frenzy, because they could be doing the stand still method where they get more evade. And it'll also track in stealth to the target it was placed on originally. So it's just best to move away instead of trying to do anything fancy there. Echo of Memory is the Shield 4 skill for Chronomancer, which is a 1.5 second block that summons a phantasm that deals slow and gives protection. And if they successfully block an attack, they can reuse the skill a second time. So just like all phantasms, you can blind the skill. The actual cast of the attack is at the end of the block, so if you want to, you can actually dodge at the end of the shield block, and they won't summon a phantasm, depending on who they're targeting. And this is good in 1v1s, but when you're +1ing a Mesmer, it's not really too useful to play so passive as to not hit their block or to be dodging their block. So what you usually want to do is use Shadow Shot if you're Dagger Pistol, which will blind their there's summoning of the Phantasm. And if you time it correctly, you can also blind with the unblockable portion of Shadow Shot. You can blind the Phantasm and then also land Shadow Shot right after the block ends. And if you're Sword Dagger, you would just go ham with your unblockable Larcenous Strikes. And if you can see in this clip, I actually blind after proccing the first block, and then the Mesmer shatters to remove the blind, but I've already casted Basilisk Venom and I steal to remove the stability and interrupt the second block. You don't want to interrupt the first block if you've already procced the second block, because there's really no point in that. So you usually want to interrupt the second block. So that's what the Chronomancer's defenses look like. But now you need to know what is actually killing you. So it's mostly the Phantasms, but specifically the Disenchanter and the Warlock are the two most dangerous animations you need to look out for. And the Disenchanter is a little bit difficult to see, but you'll see that they cast it by raising their hand in the air, sort of like this, and then it'll shoot a bolt at you, which is kind of hard to see when there's a bunch of other illusions in the area. So just look for them to raise their hand and then dodge like a second later. And then the Warlock will shoot a beam. You need to line of sight that. And remember that Chrono Phantasma makes it so that all of these phantasms occur twice. So it's really dangerous to be near them at all during that time. Also, Gravity Well has a very huge tell and can stun lock you for a really long time, but if you swap to Short Bow and use the 3 skill Disabling Shot right after the second pulse of Gravity Well, you can actually stun break yourself, even though that ability doesn't have a stun break, and avoid the third pulse, which would stun you. Now, you don't want to 1v1 as Thief too much, but for example, I go into this 1v1 here and I port up to the ledge so that I can put my Sword 2 behind that wall there. You always want to put your Sword 2 off node because it gives you a lot of peeling power, and especially on this node, it will give me a lot of ability to avoid shatters because the clones will have to path all the way up the stairs to get to me. So the distance that I'm essentially traveling for the clones is a lot further than the actual range of the Sword 2 ability. And so I just keep abusing Sword 2 to keep pressuring the Chrono. And landing the 3 skill is really the most important thing here, because keeping his boons low is going to give me more damage. First of all, because my Sword 3 does more damage when they have no boons, but also because stealing his protection is going to be really important, and giving me more sustain because I get more boons. But if this were like a 2v2 or something, the Chrono build actually has low sustain if its 2v2 partner doesn't heal it at all, because its healing skill is actually very low sustain, and the shatters don't really give it that much healing. The only thing that the Chrono has for survivability is evades and blocks. So it's a high survivability build, but a low sustain build, which means that in a 2v2 or in a 2v1, if you get it really low health, it has trouble regaining or resustaining and recovering back into those situations, and you can actually really make it lose matchups that it should win because it can't recover back into those situations. Now this is a losing 1v1 matchup because the Chrono build is really strong right now. So normally I wouldn't push this 1v1, but you're going to have to deal with the build no matter what. So it's good to know how to deal with it in like a 2v1 if you have to +1 it, or in a 2v2, something like that. Next build I'll be looking at is a Condi Mirage. So if we look at this build, it's a little more aggressively oriented and also at the same time more squishy. So as you can see here, dueling line gives you a bunch of blind and confusion. It's gonna do more Condis. It's gonna give vigor, which is really good for Mirage because their dodges are stronger, and I'll get to that in a second. It's gonna have illusions, which makes all of their shatters improved and does multiple Condis per shatter. And it's going to improve their torch, which does burning. So Mirage is different because of their dodge skill is not an animation. So they can be casting anything while dodging. They can even be jumping and then dodge while jumping. It's completely independent of any other animation. And it's a 1 second cast, or a 1 second duration rather. You have to get used to a different timing versus Mirage, but you'll see a debuff on their bar as well. So you can look at the debuff on their bar. It's the little thing right there. There's actually a split second between their last dodge and their next dodge. So they can't double dodge, but they can chain, like for example, sword 2 or a block or stealth in the time that they can't use that second dodge. So you do know that after they dodge, they are sort of vulnerable to being stolen to, but at the same time you have to know all their other cooldowns as well. And they are allowed to use ambushes while, or about a second and a half after they use Mirage Cloak. So one of the most common ambushes is the sword ambush, which is a leap, which is actually somewhat vulnerable for them, even though the end of their sword leap is a daze. You can also sort of time it so that in the distance between the first dodge and the second dodge, which there's a short split second window where they can't use the second dodge, but also they can't use any stealths or blocks or sword 2 because they're stuck in the sword leap animation. So the end of the sword leap animation, or right before the end of it, is sort of a vulnerable window where you can steal to a Mirage. And on top of that, they're going to be doing more confusion, and their dodge is also a stun break. So when you stun them, just expect them to dodge right after. And here I'm just showing the Mirage Cloak animation and the ambush sword leap, which you can interrupt if you time it well enough. But of course the daze is dangerous to play around, so you have to be careful of that. And the window of opportunity to interrupt it is pretty small. As you can see, I miss it here. Next are the torch skills, which help set up a lot of the burst damage from Condi Mirage. So the torch 4 is a poof like animation. It puts them in stealth and blinds nearby, and you can see this animation even if they're already in stealth. So if they like chain stealths, you can see this animation from far away and know that they're going for a big burst. And it'll do a lot of burning after a couple seconds. So after like a couple seconds, you definitely want to be dodging. And the Torch 5 skill is a Phantasm, which does a lot of burning and dazes in a cone in front of it. Also, a core Mesmer mechanic is Chaos Armor, which will give them a buff, which when hit will give one of 3 random conditions to the enemy. And the most important one of these is weakness. And they can get Chaos Armor by using their Staff 4. They can leap through any Chaos fields. So Jaunt and Staff 2 are leaps. Sword Ambush is a leap. And they can go through their Chaos Storm, which is a Chaos field. And you generally don't want to hit Chaos Armor because of that potential to get weakness, but sometimes you don't have a choice. So this is a DP Daredevil versus Condi Mirage 1v1, which is actually a decent matchup because Condi Mirage is kind of squishy. And I start out using some cluster bombs because you can detonate it at any point, which lets you time the attack in between their dodges, which is really strong versus Mesmer. First of all, because the AoE can kill their clones, and because the bounce off your short bow 1 is really good for pressuring the Mesmer as well. So short bow is pretty good here, but I need to land steel. He knows my steel is up probably, and I need to land steel, so I actually miss steel to a really good distort. So at this point, I'm probably going to lose a duel. I should rotate out and go somewhere else while my steel is on cooldown. So this time around, I'm going to try to land steel, even if it's not a high momentum steel, which means a steel that gets me a lot of damage off. I just need to land steel, because landing it is better than not landing it, right? So I do a low value steel there, just to get the globs, and I do land a nice backstab there, because I'm able to pressure him, because I have the resistance up. So my steel's up soon again, and I need to make sure I land it again. But he knows this, and so what I do is I shadow step, because it looks like I'm in a steel animation, and it baits him to use a bunch of his cooldowns, and I can just shadow return and play aggressive. I don't get any value off of the shadow return, but I do get value off of him using a bunch of cooldowns to thinking that I use steel. So my steel is still up, and now I can use it. But I don't want to miss again, so I go for a low value steel again, just to get the globs and maintain my position in the duel. I take a lot of damage here, but I have the globs, so I'm fine. And you don't want to use both globs at the same time, because they can easily just wait out. But I do use both sort of at the same time, which is kind of a bad play. And my steel's up again, but I'm not really too confident in this 1v1, so I have to land the steel, absolutely. So he goes in stealth. It's a really good time for me to stealth as well, because I know that I have more stealth than him. And I land a really good steel in between his sword leap animation, and now I'm sort of ahead right now. So his sword 2 wasn't casting on me, so I know he doesn't know that I'm behind him, and I can get a good backstab there. And I'm pretty far ahead right now. So if I land the steal, I win. But if I miss this steal, you know, I have a chance of losing. I want to maintain this lead, so I just keep poking him down with short bow, basically pressuring him to use cooldowns and slowly getting him to a spot where I know I can steal. And here, I know that he has no more dodges left, so I land my steal into a cluster bomb, and that's that. So if you have any more questions about how to fight Mesmers as Thief, you can ask them in the comments below, and I'll be sure to answer them. And that's it.